My fiance's family demands I quit my job. Should I do it? I sat at the dining table, my hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, trying to find comfort in its warmth. The sound of the ticking clock on the wall felt deafening. The conversation from earlier replayed in my head like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. Lena, my fiancé Marcus had said, his tone serious but cautious. My parents, well, they think you should quit your job after we get married. I had laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but the look on his face told me he wasn't kidding. Why on earth would they think that? I asked, stunned. They believe the wife should focus on the home, the family. It's just their tradition, Marcus said, his eyes avoiding mine. Tradition. That word had been the foundation of every tense discussion I'd had with his family since we'd gotten engaged 6 months ago. Marcus came from a conservative, well-to-do family with old-school values. I, on the other hand, had worked my way up to being an editor at a thriving magazine. My career was a huge part of my identity, something I'd fought for tooth and nail. They're worried about how it'll look to their friends, Marcus continued, as if that made the situation better. They think a working wife reflects poorly on the family. I stared at him, disbelief swirling with anger. So their image is more important than my dreams? Of course not, he said quickly. But can't you at least think about it? It's not like we need your income. My salary is more than enough for both of us. The conversation spiraled from there, with Marcus insisting that he wasn't trying to control me, but simply asking for compromise. Compromise, I'd snapped, is not abandoning who I am. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of Marcus's mother, Sylvia, sitting primly on her velvet couch during our last visit, drifted into my mind. Lena, dear, she had said, her voice dripping with polite condescension. Marcus tells us you're very passionate about your work. But once you're married, your priorities will shift. A good wife ensures the home runs smoothly. You wouldn't want to neglect that, would you? I'd smiled tightly and changed the subject, but the implication had been clear. Now I found myself questioning everything. I loved Marcus, but was love enough to justify such a sacrifice? Could I really give up my career, my independence, for the sake of appeasing his family? The next morning, I decided I needed clarity. I met my best friend Tara at our favorite cafe. She listened intently as I poured out the situation, her expression shifting between disbelief and anger. Lena, are you serious? She finally said, setting her coffee down with a thud. This is a massive red flag. They're trying to control you, and Marcus isn't exactly standing up for you. But I love him, I said weakly, and he's not like them. He just grew up with these expectations. Tara leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Love doesn't mean losing yourself. If you give in now, what's next? Will they decide how you raise your kids, where you live, what you wear? This isn't just about a job. It's about your freedom. Her words hit me hard. She was right. This wasn't just about my career. It was about my autonomy. That evening, Marcus came over. I greeted him with a mix of anxiety and resolve. We need to talk, I said, gesturing for him to sit. Lena, he began, but I held up a hand to stop him. Marcus, I've thought about what you said, about what your family wants, and I can't do it. My job isn't just a paycheck. It's a part of who I am. Asking me to give that up is asking me to give up a piece of myself. He looked at me, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. So that's it? You won't even consider their perspective? I have, I said firmly. But their perspective doesn't include respecting mine. If you want a wife who'll fit neatly into their expectations, then I'm not the right person for you. Marcus stared at me, the weight of my words sinking in. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. But it's not just about me. It's about my family. And what about me, Marcus? I asked, my voice trembling. Where do I fit in your vision of the future? He had no answer. It's been a week since that conversation. Marcus and I are taking some time apart, trying to figure out if we can bridge this chasm. I love him deeply, but I've realized that love alone isn't enough. It has to come with respect, with understanding, with mutual sacrifice. As I sit here in my office typing out a feature for the magazine, I feel a sense of clarity. My work is a part of my soul, and if someone truly loves me, they'll embrace all of me, including my ambition. I don't know what the future holds for Marcus and me, but I do know one thing. I won't apologize for being who I am. The days following our conversation felt like an emotional battlefield. Marcus and I exchanged a few texts, each one shorter and more distant than the last. The silence between us stretched like a chasm, and for the first time, I truly wondered if we could overcome this. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, Marcus asked to meet. I hesitated but agreed. We sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant, the candlelight flickering between us. He looked tired, as if he hadn't been sleeping well. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice careful. "About what you said, about respect and compromise." I nodded, waiting. "I love you, Lena, but I also love my family. I was raised to believe in certain traditions, and I thought I could balance both, keeping my family happy and making you happy too." He exhaled sharply. "But I see now that their happiness comes at the cost of your dreams, and that's not fair to you." A lump formed in my throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't want to lose you," he admitted. "I don't agree with my parents, and if staying with you means standing up to them, then I will, because I love you more than I love their approval." I stared at him, searching his face. Could he really mean it? "They're not going to accept this easily," I warned. "I know," he said, "but I also know that if I let them dictate our future, it won't stop at your job. Next, it'll be how we raise our kids, where we live, what we do. I don't want a marriage built on control. I want a partnership." A slow, relieved smile spread across my face. "So do I." We held hands across the table, a quiet understanding passing between us. This wouldn't be easy. His family would fight, and there would be tension. But for the first time, I knew Marcus wasn't just the man I loved. He was someone willing to fight for me. And that was worth everything. I wish I could say that after that night, everything fell into place. That Marcus and I walked into the sunset, hand in hand, and his family magically accepted our choices. But life isn't a fairy tale. The real battle was just beginning. A week after our dinner, Marcus told his parents our decision. I wasn't there for the conversation, but I didn't need to be. His mother's reaction came in the form of a carefully worded, scathing text message. "Sylvia, Lena, I'm disappointed. I had hoped you would understand what it means to be a part of this family. You are making Marcus choose between you and us, and that is not the mark of a good wife. We only want what is best for him." I stared at my phone, my stomach twisting. Marcus had told me not to engage, but I couldn't just ignore it. Me. "Sylvia, I'm not making Marcus choose. I love him and I respect his family, but I also need to stay true to myself. I hope we can find a way to understand each other." Her response was immediate. "Sylvia, understanding comes with sacrifice, dear. I only hope you don't regret your choices." Chills ran down my spine. Marcus reassured me he was on my side, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. His father barely spoke to him. His mother sent him passive-aggressive reminders of family values. His sister Caroline was the only one who tried to mediate. "You have to see where they're coming from," Caroline said one evening when she called me. "It's not about controlling you. It's about protecting the family name. They grew up believing a wife should focus on the home. You're challenging everything they know." I sighed. "Caroline, I respect tradition, but traditions have to evolve. I love Marcus, and I'm not trying to take him away from them. I just want them to respect me too." Caroline was silent for a moment. Then she said softly, "You're stronger than I was." That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, Before I married my husband, I had dreams of opening my own business, but my parents thought it was inappropriate for a woman in our family to work like that. I gave in. A bitter laugh. I love my family, but sometimes I wonder who I could have been if I had fought back. Her words struck something deep inside me. Things escalated when Marcus and I hosted a small engagement dinner for both families. I had hoped it would be a step toward peace, but I should have known better. Halfway through dinner, Sylvia placed her fork down with deliberate elegance and smiled at me. Lena, dear, have you given any more thought to stepping back from work? I'm sure the transition will be easier if you start preparing now. Silence fell over the table. Marcus stiffened beside me. Mom, we've talked about this. Sylvia gave him a patient smile. Yes, dear, but I'm talking to Lena. I took a slow sip of my wine before answering. Sylvia, I appreciate your concern, but my career isn't something I plan to give up. I hope you can respect that. Her expression didn't change, but I could see the coldness in her eyes. Respect is a two-way street, dear. I just hope you're not being selfish. I barely registered the gasp from Marcus's aunt. Marcus's hand tightened around mine. Mom, that's enough. Sylvia exhaled sharply, then turned to Marcus's father. Well, Richard, I suppose we'll have to get used to modern women and their ambitions. I stood up, my heart pounding. Excuse me. I walked out of the dining room, needing air. The weight of her disapproval pressed against my chest. A moment later, Marcus followed, placing a hand on my shoulder. Hey! I turned to him. I don't think I can do this, I whispered. I don't think they'll ever accept me. Marcus cupped my face gently. Then they'll have to live with it, because I'm not losing you. I searched his eyes, looking for hesitation. There was none. I exhaled shakily. Are you sure? His lips curved into a soft smile. More than anything. And in that moment, I knew, no matter how hard this road was going to be, we were in it together. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. We were fighting for us. The engagement dinner had been a disaster. After Marcus and I left early, his family stayed behind, no doubt discussing how I was ruining him. The next morning, I woke up to another text from Sylvia. Sylvia. Lena, I hope you slept well. I want to have a private conversation with you. Just us. No Marcus. I think we should clear the air. I stared at my phone, my gut instinct screaming trap. But a part of me was curious. Was there actually a chance for peace? I showed Marcus the message, expecting him to immediately say no. Instead, he surprised me. I think you should go, he said carefully. Not because I trust her, but because if you don't, she'll spin it like you're avoiding her. And I'll be right outside if you need me. So I agreed. We met at a quiet, upscale cafe, the kind where people whispered over delicate pastries and porcelain cups. Sylvia arrived precisely on time, wearing a beige cashmere sweater and an unreadable smile. Lena, she greeted, her voice smooth as honey. Thank you for meeting me. I nodded, my guard up. Of course. She folded her hands on the table. I won't waste time. I know you think I don't approve of you. I arched an eyebrow. Because you don't. A thin smile. You're a smart woman. I see why Marcus is so taken with you. She paused, tilting her head slightly. But let me be clear, Lena. Marriage is about longevity. Not passion, not excitement. Longevity. Do you truly think you can sustain a marriage when your career will always come first? My career isn't first, I corrected. But neither is submission. She sighed. Marcus is my only son. I raised him with certain values. I don't expect you to understand them, but I do expect you to respect them. I leaned forward. Respect is earned, Sylvia. And respect goes both ways. Her lips thinned. You're not like the women in our family, Lena. I was hoping you could adjust, but you seem determined to stand your ground. I am, I said simply. She took a slow sip of her tea, watching me over the rim. Then she placed her cup down and delivered the final blow. Then I'm afraid this marriage will never have my blessing. Silence. I felt the weight of her words settle over me, pressing against my chest. She was testing me, waiting for me to waver, to break. But I didn't. I straightened my spine and met her gaze head on. That's unfortunate, I said, my voice steady, because I don't need your blessing. For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across her face. I stood up, grabbing my purse. I love Marcus, and I hope one day you can accept that. But whether you do or don't, it won't change my decision. I walked out before she could say another word. Outside, Marcus was waiting, leaning against his car with his arms crossed. The second he saw my face, his jaw tensed. That bad? She won't give us her blessing, I admitted. His brows furrowed. Did she threaten you? No. I let out a breath. But she made it clear she won't accept me as I am. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he nodded, like he had come to a decision. Then that's on her. I blinked. Marcus. He turned to me, his expression unwavering. I love my family, Lena, but I'm building a new one with you. And if they can't accept that, then I guess we'll be doing this without them. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to cry. Instead, I threw my arms around him, holding him tight. I had been so afraid of losing him, afraid that his family would wedge themselves between us. But now, as he held me just as tightly, I knew the truth. We had already won. Despite Marcus's firm stance, I knew his mother wouldn't back down easily. And I was right. The next few weeks were filled with subtle sabotage. First, it was the guilt trips. Sylvia called Marcus nearly every day, her voice heavy with disappointment. I just don't understand why you're pushing us away, sweetheart. We've always done what's best for you, haven't we? Lena doesn't even try to fit in, Marcus. Can't you see how this hurts me? He handled it better than I expected, setting boundaries and refusing to engage in emotional blackmail. But I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Then came the rumors. One evening, Marcus's sister, Caroline, called me, her voice low and hesitant. Lena, I thought you should know that my mother's been telling people that you're manipulating Marcus, that you're controlling him. I laughed in disbelief. Controlling him? Me? Caroline sighed. She says you convinced him to go against his family, that you're forcing him to marry you under your terms. Anger flared in my chest. So she's painting me as the villain now? I just wanted you to know, Caroline said. I don't believe it. And honestly, I think she's scared. She's losing control over him and she doesn't know what to do. I thanked her for the warning, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about control. This was about power. Sylvia had spent her entire life molding Marcus into the perfect son. Now, she was realizing she couldn't mold me into the perfect wife. And that terrified her. Things escalated when the wedding plans became the next battleground. Marcus and I had chosen a venue we both loved, an intimate garden with twinkling lights and a warm, romantic feel. It was us. Sylvia, of course, had other ideas. I've already spoken to the event planner, she announced one evening over dinner at their home. We booked the country club for the wedding. It's more appropriate for a Blackwell wedding. I nearly choked on my wine. Excuse me? Oh, Lena, don't look so shocked, she said lightly. The guest list has grown far beyond what your little garden could handle. We have family expectations to meet. Marcus set down his fork with a sharp clink. Mom, we already picked our venue. Sylvia didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked onto mine. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was a power play, a final test. I folded my napkin neatly. We appreciate your input, Sylvia, but we're keeping our original venue. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Marcus? His hand found mine beneath the table. Lena's right. It's our decision. For a moment, I swore I saw something flash in her eyes, something sharp, calculating. She set her wine glass down. Then I suppose I should tell you now. I won't be attending. The air grew thick. Marcus's father, who had been silent all evening, finally looked up. Sylvia. No, Richard, she interrupted, her voice cool and composed. If Marcus wants to throw away tradition for this woman, that's his choice. But I won't sit there and watch my son disrespect his family's legacy. I felt Marcus's grip tighten on mine. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. You're saying you'd rather miss your own son's wedding than accept the woman he loves? She didn't even blink. If that's what it takes for you to see reason, then yes. Silence stretched between us. Marcus exhaled sharply. Then, with a calm I wasn't sure I could have managed, he placed his napkin on the table and stood. Then I guess we'll send you the pictures. He took my hand and led me out. Sylvia didn't stop us. That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Marcus, my heart heavy. Are you okay? I whispered. He stared at the ceiling, his jaw tight. I knew she wouldn't make this easy, but I never thought she'd go this far. I hesitated before asking, Are you sure you're okay with this? With losing them? He turned onto his side, facing me. I'm not losing anyone, Lena. They're choosing to lose me. Tears burned behind my eyes. I reached for him and he pulled me into his arms. I love you, I murmured into his chest. I love you more, he said, kissing my forehead. And I meant what I said. I'd rather marry you without them than live my life trying to please them. I held on to him tighter. I knew this wasn't over. Sylvia wouldn't give up so easily. But at that moment, I also knew this. No matter what happened, we were strong enough to face it. The silence from Sylvia was deafening. It had been 2 weeks since Marcus and I walked out of that dinner, and in that time, his mother hadn't called, texted, or even tried to reach out. It felt unnatural, like the eerie calm before a storm. And then, the storm hit. I was at work when Marcus called. His voice was tight. Lena, you need to come home, now. I immediately grabbed my bag. What's wrong? He hesitated. It's my parents. They're here. My stomach twisted. I'll be there in 10 minutes. When I got home, Sylvia and Richard were sitting in our living room. Sylvia was perfectly composed, legs crossed, a polite but cold smile on her face. Richard, however, looked deeply uncomfortable, as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus stood near the kitchen, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. I closed the door behind me, forcing myself to stay calm. Hello, Sylvia. Sylvia's smile didn't waver. Lena, dear, so good to see you. I glanced at Marcus, who gave me the smallest shake of his head. Be careful. I took a seat across from them. What brings you here? Sylvia sighed, placing a delicate hand over her heart. I wanted to have one final conversation before we make any irreversible decisions. I knew exactly what she meant. Marcus exhaled sharply. Mom. She lifted a hand, stopping him. Let me speak, Marcus. Her eyes flickered back to me. Lena, I understand you and I have differences, and I may have been too harsh before, but I am willing to extend an olive branch. I kept my expression neutral. I'm listening. She tilted her head. You're a smart woman. Surely you must see that marriage requires sacrifices. I folded my arms. Sacrifices should go both ways, don't you think? Her smile tightened. Of course, which is why I'm willing to compromise. Marcus scoffed. I doubt that. Sylvia ignored him. I won't ask you to quit your job anymore. I blinked. You won't? She nodded, her tone almost gracious. I realized that was unfair of me. I don't want my son to resent me. I stared at her, waiting for the catch, because there was always a catch. She leaned forward slightly. But in return, I expect you to adjust to our family's values in other ways. I knew it. I exhaled slowly. And what exactly does adjusting mean? Sylvia's smile was all polished steel. For starters, I want to guarantee that when you have children, you'll stay home with them. No full-time career, no nannies, just proper hands-on motherhood. I stiffened. Before I could respond, she continued, I also expect that family decisions, holidays, major life choices will always include our input. We are a unit, Lena, and we operate as one. Richard finally spoke up, his voice gruff. What Sylvia means is that we want to be involved. We don't want to lose our son. I met his eyes. There was something genuine there, something hesitant, unlike Sylvia's calculated precision. But it didn't change what they were asking. I took a deep breath and said, no. Sylvia blinked, clearly not expecting outright refusal. Excuse me? No, I repeated, sitting up straighter. I appreciate you trying to compromise. But what you're really asking is for me to agree to your terms. Again. Her expression darkened. You don't want to raise your own children? I narrowed my eyes. Don't twist my words, of course I do. But Marcus and I will decide what that looks like. Not you. Marcus stepped forward, standing beside me. Mom, Dad, Lena and I are building our future. And if you can't accept that, then maybe it's better if you're not involved. Sylvia's lips pressed into a thin line. So you'd cut us out completely? Marcus shook his head. That's up to you. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Sylvia stood, smoothing out her blouse. I see. Richard hesitated, but followed suit. Sylvia glanced at me one last time. You may have won this battle, Lena, but don't think for a second that I won't do what's best for my son. A chill ran down my spine, but I met her gaze head on. Neither will I. With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, Richard trailing behind her. The door shut, leaving Marcus and me in heavy silence. After a moment, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Well, that went well. Marcus ran a hand down his face. Jesus. I turned to him. Are you okay? He looked at me, then pulled me into his arms. I've never been more sure about anything. I melted into his embrace, knowing this wasn't over. But no matter what came next, no matter what Sylvia tried, we would face it together. For a few weeks after Sylvia and Richard's visit, things were quiet. Too quiet. Marcus and I kept waiting for the next move. Another guilt trip, another demand, another dramatic ultimatum. But nothing came. At first, I thought maybe we had finally reached a stalemate. That maybe Sylvia had realized she couldn't control us and had chosen to back down. I should have known better, because Sylvia wasn't the kind of woman who admitted defeat. She was the kind of woman who changed tactics. It started with Marcus's extended family. His aunt, the one who had gasped at Sylvia's comment during the engagement dinner, reached out first. Lena, sweetheart, I just want to understand. Why are you making things so difficult? We all love Marcus, and we just want what's best for him. Then his cousin messaged him. Dude, is it true you're cutting your mom out of the wedding? That's messed up, man. Even Caroline, who had been supportive, sounded hesitant the next time we spoke. Mom's been talking to everyone, she admitted. She's saying you're turning Marcus against the family. I clenched my jaw. She's spinning the story. I know. Caroline sighed. But some people believe her. Marcus overheard and immediately took my phone. Caroline, I love you, but enough is enough. Mom is choosing this. We're not cutting her out. She's refusing to accept our choices. Caroline hesitated. I get it, Marcus. I do. But you know how our family is. They stick together. Then maybe they should start sticking together for the right reasons. Marcus snapped before hanging up. I rubbed his back as he exhaled sharply. You okay? He let out a bitter laugh. It's funny. My mom keeps talking about family values, but she's the one trying to turn everyone against us. I squeezed his hand. We knew she wouldn't let this go. I know, he muttered. I just didn't think she'd go this far. But Sylvia wasn't done yet. The final straw came 2 weeks before the wedding. I was in the middle of a work meeting when I saw an email notification pop up on my phone. From Sylvia Blackwell. Subject: an important decision. My stomach dropped. I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway before opening it. It was long. And worse, it was addressed to both Marcus and me. I started reading, my pulse pounding. Lena and Marcus, it is with great sadness that I must formally withdraw my support from this wedding. I had hoped we could find a way to reach a compromise, but it is clear that my concerns have been ignored. Marriage is about sacrifice and tradition, and I cannot, in good conscience, celebrate a union that disregards the values our family has upheld for generations. As such, Richard and I have decided that we will not be attending the ceremony. We will also not be involved in any future celebrations unless there is a sincere effort to repair the damage that has been done. Marcus, you are my son. I will always love you. But I hope one day you see the mistake you are making. And Lena, I hope you can live with the consequences of your choices. I stared at my screen, my hands trembling. It wasn't just an ultimatum. It was a threat. I immediately called Marcus. Check your email. Now. There was a pause. Then, what the hell? I heard his breathing grow sharp, heavy. She's really doing this? Marcus, I'll handle it, he said, his voice dangerously calm. We're not playing this game anymore. That night, Marcus made the call. It was short. Director. I got your email, he told Sylvia, and I just want you to know, this changes nothing. A pause. Then her cool voice. Marcus, you're making a mistake. Number you are. His voice hardened. You're trying to manipulate us into submission, but all you're doing is proving exactly why we need to set boundaries. Silence. Then she said, so that's it? You're cutting us out? Marcus sighed. Mom, I don't want to, but I'm not going to keep begging you to accept the woman I love. Sylvia's voice was quiet but sharp. I hope she's worth it. Marcus's jaw tightened. She is. Click. He set his phone down and let out a breath. Well, that's that. I placed a hand on his. How do you feel? He exhaled slowly. Lighter. And for the first time in months, so did I. Because Sylvia had played her last card, and we were still standing. Together. Epilogue. 1 year later. The wedding had been perfect. Sylvia and Richard never showed, but Caroline did, along with a handful of Marcus's extended family members who had seen through the manipulation. And honestly, it was better that way. Marcus and I built a life together, one free from constant pressure and impossible expectations. We still heard from Sylvia occasionally, mostly passive-aggressive holiday messages. But we had learned to set boundaries. And when, a year later, I held our newborn daughter in my arms, I knew we had made the right choice. Because she would grow up knowing that love was built on respect, not control. And that was the only family value that mattered. Life after the wedding had been peaceful, or as peaceful as it could be with Sylvia lurking in the background. Marcus and I built our life together on our own terms. We traveled, grew in our careers, and eventually we welcomed our daughter, Emma. For a while, we didn't hear much from Sylvia. Occasionally, she would send a passive-aggressive holiday card or a carefully worded text message, always avoiding the real issue. It was clear she hadn't forgiven us for choosing our own path. But I thought that maybe, just maybe, we had reached a sort of uneasy truce. I should have known better, because Sylvia had one more trick up her sleeve. It was a Saturday afternoon. Marcus was outside grilling, and I was in the nursery, rocking Emma to sleep. Then the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a package, so I ignored it. Then it rang again. And again. And that's when I knew. I carefully placed Emma in her crib and walked to the front door, my stomach twisting. I took a deep breath before opening it. And there she was. Sylvia Blackwell, standing on my doorstep like a perfectly dressed hurricane. She wasn't alone, Beside her was Richard, looking deeply uncomfortable, and, shockingly, Caroline, who gave me an apologetic half smile. I crossed my arms. Sylvia, to what do I owe this surprise visit? Sylvia smiled as if we were old friends. Lena, dear, it's been far too long. May we come in? I hesitated. I didn't want to let her in, but this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Marcus, about Emma. And as much as I disliked Sylvia, Richard and Caroline had never been outright cruel to me. So I stepped aside. Fine, but if you start with the games again, you're leaving. Sylvia swept past me like she owned the place, her eyes scanning our home. Lovely decor, she commented. Very modern. I rolled my eyes and turned to Richard and Caroline. Would you like some coffee? Caroline smiled. That would be great, thanks. I led them into the living room where Marcus had just walked in from the backyard, wiping his hands on a towel. The second he saw them, he froze. His eyes locked on his mother, then flicked to me, silently asking, Are you okay? I nodded slightly. Then he sighed and dropped the towel. All right, let's get this over with. Sylvia perched on the couch like a queen about to issue a decree. Marcus, she said smoothly, you look well. He gave her a tight smile. Cut to the chase, Mom. Why are you here? Sylvia sighed dramatically, as if we were being unreasonable. Marcus, Richard, and I have been talking, and we've decided that this has gone on long enough. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What exactly has gone on long enough? This estrangement. She waved a hand. It's ridiculous. You're our son. We shouldn't be living like strangers. I scoffed. You mean the estrangement you created? She ignored me. I think it's time we move past all of this and start fresh. I crossed my arms. And what exactly does starting fresh mean to you? Sylvia smiled, and something about it made me uneasy. It means we put aside our differences. We act like a family again. I narrowed my eyes. And by act like a family, do you mean fall in line? Her expression didn't change. Lena, dear, must you always assume the worst? I didn't bother answering. Marcus exhaled sharply. Mom, I want a relationship with you, but only if it's built on respect. And that means respecting Lena and the choices we make for our family. Sylvia's smile faltered for the first time. And do you honestly believe she respects our family, Marcus? My hands clenched into fists. Excuse me? She tilted her head. You took him from us, Lena. You forced him to choose between his family and you. I opened my mouth, but Marcus beat me to it. No, you forced me to choose, he snapped. And I chose my wife. My daughter, my own damn life. Sylvia's jaw tightened. So that's it then? You're just done with us? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, clearly exhausted. Mom, we're not cutting you out. But if you want to be part of our lives, you need to stop trying to control us. Sylvia looked like she wanted to argue. But then Richard, who had been silent this entire time, finally spoke. Sylvia, he said quietly. Enough. Sylvia turned to him, clearly surprised. Richard, no, he interrupted. Marcus is right. We pushed too hard, and we almost lost him because of it. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something real in Sylvia's expression. Hesitation, maybe even regret. She glanced at Caroline, who nodded slightly, then back at Marcus. Then she sighed. I suppose I could try to be more open-minded. I didn't trust her. Not yet. But it was a start. Marcus nodded. Good, because we want you in Emma's life, but only if you respect our boundaries. Sylvia's gaze flickered toward the hallway where Emma was still sleeping. May I see her? Marcus hesitated, then looked at me. Your call, his eyes said. I sighed. Fine, but if you wake her up, I'm kicking you out. Sylvia let out a soft laugh. A real one, not the polite, fake kind. Fair enough, We led her to the nursery, where Emma was still sleeping peacefully. Sylvia stared at her for a long time, something unreadable in her eyes. Then, softly, she whispered, "She looks like you, Marcus." Something in my chest eased. Just a little. Maybe things would never be perfect between us. Maybe Sylvia would always be Sylvia, but maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to change. And that was enough. For now. For a moment, I thought we had reached some sort of fragile peace. Sylvia had seen Emma. She had softened, if only slightly. And for the first time in years, Marcus and I let our guard down. I should have known better, because the real betrayal was still coming. 3 weeks after Sylvia's visit, Marcus and I were sitting in our living room playing with Emma when his phone rang. It was Caroline. Marcus smiled as he answered. "Hey, Caro." "Marcus," she interrupted, her voice shaking. I didn't know if I should tell you, but I can't keep this from you." Marcus frowned. "What's wrong?" Caroline took a deep breath. "Mom is filing for grandparents' rights." The room spun. I sat up straight. "She's what?" Marcus went pale. "That's insane." "I know," Caroline whispered. "But she's serious. She went to a lawyer. She's saying you and Lena are alienating her from Emma's life, that you're keeping her from her own granddaughter." I felt sick. She was trying to legally force her way into our lives. Marcus clenched his jaw. "This is war." We didn't wait. We drove straight to Sylvia's house that night. Marcus didn't even knock. He just pushed open the front door, his face like thunder. Sylvia looked up from her wine glass, completely unfazed. "Marcus, Lena, how lovely of you to visit." Marcus slammed a piece of paper onto the table. "What the hell is this, Mom?" She sighed dramatically, setting down her glass. "I see Caroline ran straight to you." I stepped forward, my voice shaking with fury. "You're taking us to court? You think a judge is going to force us to let you into Emma's life?" Sylvia stood, her expression cold. "I wouldn't have to do this if you weren't trying to cut me out." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Jesus Christ, Mom. We let you in. You saw Emma. We were trying." Sylvia's eyes darkened. "Trying isn't enough." Richard, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke. "Sylvia, don't do this." She whirled around. "Stay out of this, Richard." But he didn't. He stepped between us and her. "You think a judge is going to side with you? You've spent years manipulating Marcus, trying to control his life, and now you're trying to control his child?" Sylvia's lip curled. "I am her grandmother." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That doesn't give you rights to her, Sylvia. You don't own us. You never did." For the first time, Sylvia looked uncertain. She had expected us to fold, to give in like we always had. But this time, we were done. Marcus leaned in, his voice dangerously low. "You have one chance, Mom. Drop this, right now. Or you will never see Emma again. No visits, no photos, nothing." Sylvia's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, because she knew. We meant it. She could fight us, but she would lose everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sat back down, exhaling sharply. Then quietly, she said, "Fine." I didn't trust her. Not for a second. But Marcus nodded. "We're done here." And with that, we walked out, slamming the door behind us. Sylvia did drop the case. Maybe she knew she would lose. Maybe she realized she had pushed too far. Or maybe she just wasn't ready to burn the last thread holding her to Marcus. Either way, we never heard from her again. Richard, however, divorced her 6 months later. "I spent my whole life letting her control me," he admitted over coffee one afternoon. "Watching you two stand up to her made me realize I had to do the same." And as for us, we moved. A new city, a fresh start, a life free from Sylvia's grasp. And as I rocked Emma to sleep in our new home, I whispered a silent promise. She would never grow up thinking love meant control. Never.